Canada has the safest food system in the world. We have nothing to apologize for to anyone. And the Europeans will find all sorts of measures that will prevent us from selling freely and fairly into that market.
Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Swine Canada podcast. I am Dr. Dan Columbus, and I will be your host for today's episode. And with me today, I have Stephen Heckbert, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian Pork Council. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Do I call you Dr. Dan? Do you like that better?
You can call me that. That's fine, or just Dan is fine. I'm usually not too formal.
Well, I don't mind calling you Dr. Dan. It just sounds sort of friendlier and livelier a little bit. So
that works for me. So, Stephen, I know because you're fairly new to the role, and people might not be aware of who you are. I'll just ask you to introduce yourself and kind of give us an idea of your journey so far.
Sure. So, Stephen Heckbert, I've been at the Pork Council now not quite 18 months. It'll be 18 months on June the 5th. So started a year ago, December. Have hit the ground. It's a lot to learn pretty quickly, so I won't claim that I've learned as much as other people would like me to have learned just yet, but still engaged in a learning process. Came to the job from actually from a variety of consulting experiences, but also academic background. So I used to teach at Algonquin College here in Ottawa, taught public relations, communications, public affairs. So more of a background in advocacy and communications than in agriculture, although I did grow up. My dad was a diesel mechanic, and so spent a lot of time working on tractors on Prince Edward Island. So have some familiar with agriculture from a very early age, and also did some consulting for ag clients over the last 15 years. So certainly have a pretty broad background in a variety of sectors. And before that, I've worked as a political staffer. I've worked as a consultant. So just sort of a pretty broad background in a variety of places, but super excited to join the industry. It's been a wonderful journey so far, and have enjoyed working with the board, with the provincial pork organizations, and with everyone involved in the industry. People have been super welcoming, and it's really been just a wonderful learning curve for me.
Yeah, it's great. Hopefully you can continue to use your experience to help out at the CPC. So today's topic, I think, is something that the CPC is well involved in, and hopefully you can give us some information about what's going on and what we're looking for, and that is specifically when it comes to trade. And so we can talk by starting out with trade relations and what's going on specifically with Europe, and maybe even more so with the UK.
Sure. So as listeners know, of course, trade is vital to the pork industry in Canada. We export 70% of our products. So our trading relationships really matter to us, as opposed to our American cousins, sort of where 75% of their product is consumed domestically. Still an important, obviously, trading relationship for them. But, we really rely on trade with other nations. In fact, Japan, imports 47% of the pork they import comes from Canada. So we're also a vital sort of cog, a vital piece of food security around the world. So with particular, we've been in the news in recent times about the UK and about our relationships with Europe, largely because we have a very poor trading relationship with the UK in particular. We probably trade about 20,000 tons worth of or 20,000 kilograms of product with the UK on a yearly basis, and they send about 2 million kilograms of product our way. So the disparity in our trade with the UK is one of the reasons why we were so public with our opposition to the say no to a bad deal, allowing the United Kingdom to ascend to the CPTPP, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's more broadly known. So the UK has applied to join that trade agreement. And as part of the discussions, the government of Canada got us a a quota, an increased quota in Europe. But one of the reasons why we were opposed to that ascension is getting an increased quota that we can't access isn't going to help us. And there's a couple of reasons why we can't access that. The UK has put in some phytosanitary, some PSP measures that are designed to keep us from having a fair and free trading field. So whether it's around carcass wash or whether it's around some of the other requirements that they've put in place, trichinella testing, for example. We simply aren't able to access their market, and yet they have fairly free access to our market. So we just simply asked the government to sort of level that playing field. So make sure that you have discussions with the UK and try to make it so that it's a more balanced trading relationship. We're free traders in the pork industry. We, as you know, our farmers have long advocated that they believe that the product that they've got to sell is a high quality, high in demand product, and as long as they have access, it's our view that Canadian pork sells itself in many respects. So that's why we came out so strongly against the UK's ascension to the CPTPP. For a variety of other reasons, the UK has broken off ties on a bilateral trade agreement with Canada at this moment. So it's just we enter into these trading agreements, and of course they're broad and big, and they've got a lot of players. But the agricultural sector is vital to Canada, and it's vital to Canada's long-term future. It's vital to Canada's role in the world. One of the things we have is we have this abundance of land. We've got this abundance of resources, and we're able to sort of provide food for countries. We produce more than 250% of the food we need to feed ourselves, and so that means that we've got food that can go feed the world. And all we're asking for is that other places who want to buy our product, do so in a spirit of fairness and in a spirit of fair and free trade. And unfortunately, the United Kingdom is simply not a great trading partner for us right now.
Yeah. So do you see a change in that coming? Like, is there any potential for that to improve, or is it kind of just what it is?
It's funny because they did Brexit. You may remember that was a big deal. I seem to recall it was a big deal for them. They were all excited about doing it. The challenge for them is they basically sort of brought all of the old EU, all of the European restrictions around trade in lots of agricultural products. They brought all those restrictions with them. So they did Brexit. They were against all these EU regulations, but they brought all the EU regulations. And we're challenged. Like, we've got an agreement through CETA supposed to give us access to the European market, but we find it a challenge in Europe as well. Europe is very good at non-tariff trade barriers. They make it sound like it's a food security issue or it's a food safety issue. They will sort of remind people within their borders that, if you did this, and yet our food safety system is second to none. Canada has the safest food system in the world. We have nothing to apologize for to anyone. And the Europeans will find all sorts of measures that will prevent us from selling freely and fairly into that market. And so when Britain did exit Brexit, they basically sort of brought all those regulations over. And so the challenges we faced with Europe, and we still face the same sort of unfair differential in terms of trade with Europe. It's about 100 times more imports from Europe than we are able to export to Europe. So, as you can imagine, farmers in Canada and pork producers in particular feel that that's a bit of an unfair trading relationship, and they're right to feel that way. And so we continue to try to work with the government of Canada to balance out that trading relationship for both us and I. If you brought someone from the beef sector on, they probably would say something similar, simply because the Europeans have a bit of an expertise at developing these non-tariff trade barriers. From our perspective, I think the best thing we could do is, in many respects, simply agree. Well, we won't buy your pork, and we won't try to sell you our pork, and the same for on that side. So let's just eliminate any pretense that we're trying to trade with Europe, and that might be one of the solutions that we eventually end up with.
Yeah. So maybe let's change more to a good news story. We'll head to the other side of the other ocean then, and looking at you mentioned already Japan, and I think that has been very much a success story, and specifically in recognizing the quality of the Canadian pork, right? But then we can also mention maybe other countries where we've had success on that side.
Yeah, so we've obviously Japan. We are crucial in terms of the Japanese market, and we've had, many missions there. We've had, much success. Canadian exporters have been very diligent in building the market and maintaining and growing that relationship, and we're very pleased with how that's been going. And there's also other demand coming from other growing markets. We were just in the Philippines in February. We went for the opening of the new Indo-Pacific office in Manila. So our chair and I went with the Minister of Agriculture. So he went to Manila to open the new Indo-Pacific office, which is in Manila, to try to sort of, help with some of the challenges. There's always challenges in any trade relationship, right? They will have, they want to make sure that our facilities meet their requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So from our perspective, having an office that can provide those sort of technical support on the ground for those markets in the Indo-Pacific, crucial. We lobbied hard for the establishment of that office, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to go, was because we'd lobbied for the establishment of the office, so we wanted to go celebrate its arrival. And just really an incredible learning experience, right? We're, about just under 10% of our exports now go to the Philippines, and the market there is growing. And so, we wanted to sort of go celebrate that as well, and learned a lot, really useful to go to those things. Last fall, we went on a trade mission to Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. And so obviously there is still some growth potential in Japan, but there's certainly growth potential for us in Korea. There's growth potential in Vietnam, and really, it's an area of the world where they eat a lot of pork. They like pork. They like Canadian pork. It's a key staple of their diet in many parts of that region, and so we think there's tremendous opportunities over there. So we will continue to work with our partners on the transformation side. So on the processing side, our processing partners in Canada are doing a great job building those markets as well. And we just want to be there as the producers to help them, by telling our story about what we do to make sure that the pork is the kind of high quality that it is, and what we do to make sure that we're going to continue to help them grow those markets as well.
Are there any markets that we're not currently in, or maybe could expand our influence?
So the Thai market, for example. So Thailand, we're not very big in that market yet. There's other obviously growth opportunities, right? At the same time, there are other countries there with some religious exemptions, where they may not consume much pork. So it's really a case by case, country by country, opportunity for us. But this is a place in the world. I hadn't been to Philippines before, obviously, but you're looking at 100 million people. Living in a place that would be smaller by land volume than 7 of 10 Canadian provinces. So there's 100 million people living in a fairly tight area, and so anything we can do to sort of crack that market. We're already talking about a market that's 2.5 times the size of the Canadian market. So we sell 30% of our pork in the Canadian market. So if we can sell a similar amount in the Philippines, well, that'd be everything we produce today. So we see that as a great growth opportunity, and we want to take advantage of the opportunities we see, and where we have some really good connections too. That's one of the other advantages Canada has that sometimes we may not focus on, right? But there's an enormous Filipino diaspora in Canada, right? If you go to Winnipeg, if you go to lots of places in Manitoba, you'll see, many, either first generation, second generation Filipinos. And so why would we not want to take advantage of that kind of diaspora? Why would we not want to take advantage of those kinds of ties between Canada and the Philippines, and help use that to help grow our markets?
Yeah, it's just reminding me of last week in our spring producer meetings. Our new welfare researcher, Jen Yoon, was talking about her home country of Taiwan, with 24 million people in an area the size of Vancouver Island. And pork is massive. And one of the things that she talked about is there on a lot of the menus, they actually put the country of origin of where the pork is. And Canada popped up a lot on there, right? Taiwan was obviously kind of everywhere, but then Canada was like one of the ones, and basically saying, like, what is it? Are people understanding that is a good quality? That's what they want.
Yeah, and that's our best. I mean, that's really our best story, right? Is we produce a very high quality product. It's raised with great standards around animal health, around animal care. We have great standards, and we have a wonderful system that we developed, with producers and with our regulators and with the various provinces. So the more we can take advantage of that great story we've got to tell, the easier it is to sell our product around the world. And we just simply need to be out there, both as producers but also as processors. But one of the things that has changed in the world, as you know, is that people do want to have that connection with the farmer. They want to have that connection with the producer. They want to know, who's raising this product, who's producing the product that I'm eventually consuming. And the more we can learn to tell our story in a much more sort of progressive and consistent way, I think that's probably one of the reasons why they may have brought me on is the lessons I've learned over a lifetime of consulting and communications is how much harder it is today to get people's attention, just because of the vast amount of information coming at people, but also how important it is to just stay consistent. Just be consistent with what you're telling people and don't try to sort of change yourself. Be yourself, be authentically you, and tell your story. And we've got a great story in the Canadian pork sector, and we just need to be a little more aggressive about telling it.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue. And obviously we can't talk about trade unless we mention our neighbors to the south. And why I think this is a good part to maybe move into them is with this introduction of the voluntary country of origin labeling that's now being reintroduced. I say reintroduced because we all know about the stuff with Cool, in the past. And so maybe just get your thoughts on that.
So the United States USDA has introduced a voluntary country of origin, voluntary products USA label, and it's really still up in the air as to how much processors in the United States or how much retailers in the US will be asking for this. And that's really the difference between this and the mandatory was that, in this case, retailers will basically have to pull it in through. And if you're a retailer in the United States, whether you think this is going to be a product differentiator or not, I can't speak for them. But we're confident that the quality of Canadian pork is not something that people in the United States fear. We think people in the U.S. would view Canadian pork as an asset, and so we're obviously monitoring this. We're working with the government of Canada, providing sort of comments. We're providing our own comments, but this is one case where I actually think the cooperation between us and our American partners is very strong. Like the National Pork Producers Council was very firm in their comments, against this new labeling requirement. So we think that the story really will be it's sort of a to be determined, but there's consumers want to know that they're getting quality. They want to know that that there's some traceability, that there's some standards around that, and we think we've in partnership with our American partners, we think we've got again the best standards in the world. Ours are slightly different than the U.S., and so we think we've got a very good story to tell on our own. But we really think that the take up on the voluntary product of the USA, we'll have to sort of wait and see what's happening on that. We're also monitoring. The USDA is a pretty big buyer of pork. And so that's one of the things we're monitoring is what will that look like for them on the product of USA labeling. So there's lots of things we're looking at. There's lots of things we're trying to keep an eye on, but we're reasonably confident, at this stage that we've been telling our story about the quality of Canadian pork, about the integrated supply chains between the two countries. We know that processors are telling the same story. So we'll see. I guess the bigger question there is we'll see. The probably bigger question in the United States is how do they resolve these sorts of state level barriers that seem to be popping up now, whether you talk about Prop 12 in California, Question 3 in Massachusetts, although those are very different things because Prop 12 has criminal citations with it for reasons that I'm not sure I completely understand, whereas Question 3 is much more of a civil based action. But, and the point we raise all the time is again, we're consistent with this. Very difficult for a country like ours to have a trade deal, a negotiated free trade agreement with the government of the United States, with the federal level, and then to have state level governments, place non-tariff trade barriers in the way of the free flow of trade. And that makes it very difficult to have a predictable trading relationship and really does overcomplicate sort of the cross-border efforts. So that's really our opposition to Prop 12 and Question 3 and some of these state level requirements that are coming in. So that's really what we're trying to focus on, is how do we understand and know what we're dealing with when we have these kinds of trade agreements with the national level, but other sort of subnational governments want to get involved in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's even the other states were opposed to this, right? And moving across state borders. So then when you bring in the international borders, it's a whole bigger issue, right? And especially thinking like what is the percentage of live pigs that come from Manitoba into the US that are now affected by that, right?
Yeah. So, and again, that's really where, the more you complicate these kinds of trading relationships by, imagine you're trying to track a weanling that moves from Manitoba to a farm in Iowa. Let's say it moves at 6 weeks, or let's say it moves at 8 weeks. Well, now there's a level of paperwork and documentation that is just simply probably unmanageable for the average producer, and then you've got to try to track the movement of that pig as it grows through the entire supply chain, and it just all it does is it increases cost to consumers. And the funny part is that if you look at what's happened over the last couple of years in terms of inflation, it's always surprising to me to see politicians willingly increasing the costs of basic foodstuffs for their populations. I mean, of all the things you can control, it's this kind of price increase for your consumers. Should be a no-brainer from my perspective, but maybe I've lost sort of some of my political skills by being in academia for 15 years.
So I want to get back to the discussion about the origin labeling thing, because you mentioned about quality, and they recognize that Canadian pork is a high quality product. But I'm wondering, especially when we're talking about the American consumer, is it a question of quality, or is it a question of kind of this America first? We want something that's homegrown, that's going to come into play when it comes to whether this labeling becomes a thing.
There's two parts to that, and I'll try to do them sort of in. So if you ask me a question as a pollster, I'm almost automatically going to have an opinion, whether I actually will deliver on that opinion in my purchasing or whether I'm going to deliver on that opinion as I flow through the rest of my life. That's the second part of that. So if you say to me, Stephen, you're Canadian, do you want to buy Canadian? 100%. Of course I want to buy Canadian. I love this country. I love everything this country produces. Of course that's what I want to do. Then I go to the grocery store and, American beef from the US is 20 cents a kilogram cheaper. All of that commitment to, sort of my country, is weakened by my wallet. And so the notion that you use a consumer survey that doesn't really get to the full question is very difficult. And frankly, until you actually put the price in front of people, it's really easy for them to say, of course that's what I want to do. And it's a particular challenge because, of course, you want to make decisions as, if you're a regulator or if you're in government, and you've heard from people, you've heard this market research that you paid for, shockingly, delivers a result that tells you that your plan is the right plan. But, you really have to accept that lots of things, when they meet the rocks of reality, sort of crumble away a little bit in terms of their intention. And people vote with their wallet. They always vote with their wallet. And so if you look at what we've developed in North America with a very efficient supply chain moving products across this border, particularly in pork, so that pork is the most affordable protein. It delivers high quality, nutrients to, everyone who cooks it and everyone who eats it. That becomes, anything that will make that trade harder is automatically going to increase cost to consumers. And if you're a consumer and you think to yourself, well, that survey I answered 2 years ago is the reason why this cost has gone up now, no one is going to make that connection in their brain. No one's going to say, oh, actually, I did this. Plus, there's a whole bunch of reasons why I'm not as sold on market research as I would have been, largely because, if you'd done market surveys 20 years ago, the question I always ask people now is, when was the last time you answered a poll? And the fact of the matter is, none of us have answered a market survey in forever. Like, we don't have the time, right? Like of the things that you will take the time to do, you're not taking the time to do those now. So I may be advocating that we take the time to do those things and also remember what it is we really want, or maybe it's not a tool that we should use to form public policy anymore. I think that's what I'm arguing for.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think we'll wait and see what the wallets say.
And that's the other thing, right?
Yeah.
If you were to ask an American consumer, do they believe that a product, an animal that grew up in Canada, is safe to eat, they're going to say yes. If you ask them, is that product going to be as good as an American product? They're probably going to say yes. They would like to say no, but they're probably going to say yes. There are lots of places in the world where that answer might be different. But from their perspective, this is the other thing we always need to remember at the U.S. When they think of us, and they don't often think of us, but when they think of us, they think of snow, they think of sort of clean water, they think of mountain ranges, they think of, really, it is really the most pure environment they can imagine. And that's how they think of us. When they think of us at all, it is basically as the attic of their country, and it's a wonderful place.
I guess that's a good thing. Yeah. So before we get to our final 3 questions, I'll just ask for a take-home message for our listeners for today's episode.
So, number one thing I would say is that we continue to focus on trade as a big issue for producers. We know how important trade is. We know how important it is for us to be advocating for producers and advocating that, why we want to see more and better trade deals, why we want to make sure that those are going to be science-based and fair. And that's something we do every day here. So the number one takeaway I would want producers to know out of this is, we take that responsibility very seriously to advocate on behalf of farmers. Like, I have been lots of farms in Canada now in my role, obviously not in too many barns, but I've had conversations with lots of producers. And really, one of the things I think I'm always happy to tell policymakers and folks when I'm dealing with them is there's nobody who's more focused on food, on product quality, on making sure that they deliver excellence to their end consumer than a Canadian pork producer. And that's something I think we have to do a better job of telling that story. And it's one of the things that I'm committed to trying to do.
Okay, well, before we let you go, I have 3 final questions for you.
It's time for our famous 3. Customers are always looking for greater efficiency. High-Phos from DSM Firmenich is the result of our commitment to develop a phytase enzyme which could deliver ever greater benefits. High-Phos increases the amount of plant phosphorus available to the animal, and less inorganic phosphorus needs to be added to the diet, resulting in substantial savings on feed costs. High-Phos improves average daily gain and feed efficiency. It also reduces both environmental impact and feed costs, meaning High-Phos has a big impact on the sustainability of animal production. Learn more at dsm.com/High-Phos, HIPHOS.
So the first one is what your favorite swine-related resource is.
My favorite swine-related resource. So I have really sort of gotten into the Western hog producer, and I say that just because obviously it's produced by Alberta Pork, but it really covers the prairies, and it does give me a good sense of what's happening, at least in Western Canada, which is not an area that I get to go to as much. We probably, as you know, have discussions with all of our provincial pork organization colleagues on an ongoing basis, but it's always nice to get sort of the lay of the land from the producer's perspective through that. So that's been a pretty important resource for me. Plus, of course, I get Jim Long's commentary. I get a lot of email. So keeping up on that is part of the job for sure.
Yeah. Almost too many emails. I'm on a lot of those too. And
I get a lot of emails. Although I do appreciate you didn't ask me about what I thought about the Toronto Maple Leafs losing in the first round.
Yeah, so we're not going to touch that. That might be more contentious issue than trade, I think.
That's right. That might be more contentious. Exactly.
Okay. Our next question then is a favorite book or a book recommendation that you would have for our listeners. And this can be anything. It doesn't have to be pigs.
Great question. I actually... my favorite book of all time is A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. And so I don't know whether it was when I read it the first time or when I read it the second time, but it's a book I go back to fairly frequently. Just a good story about sort of growing up in sort of difficult circumstances and what it takes to sort of, be your most authentic self, and how sort of, courage is actually sometimes a word we overuse, but it's often about how do you sort of have that notion baked into yourself and into your life. So I think that's a great book. I also have written a book. So I would recommend that just because I'm trying to get the I did write a book about media relations a long time ago. So oddly enough, I don't refer back to it, but that I think is one of the things. If I could do something for producers, it would be to help them. I won't say become more arrogant, but to become more willing to talk about themselves and the good work they do. Our producers are very humble, and humility is great, but there are times when you have to really step up and be a little bit more assertive about the wonderful job you're doing. And getting our producers to understand that, and that they have to tell their story in a more complete way sometimes, is one of the things that we continue to work on here all the time.
Yeah, it's great. So our final question then is, when you look back at leaders or mentors, or even you look at producers that are particularly successful, what is one characteristic that they all seem to share that makes them successful?
Very good question. I think the producers who are successful, and I would say this is true for everybody, is focus. They may not, they're a bit hedgehog. Like if you go back to the sort of the notion of which is better? Is it better to be a fox or a hedgehog? Right? A fox knows many things. A hedgehog knows only one. But the hedgehog is able to sort of, by focusing on that one thing that they know in terms of self-protection, that kind of focus can really be helpful. And I think focus is really, how do you make sure that you stick with the priority that you know is going to make a difference in your business, and make sure that that's the priority that you write down as you start every day. Too many people chase too many processes, right? And they shift with the winds too much, and they don't necessarily stay on, this is the thing I know I can do well. This is what's going to differentiate us from our competitor. And if you can get that focus right, it can make the world a difference for you. It can really help you because you come at it every day with a singular focus on what the big priorities are. And I think that that's been a characteristic that I would say I've seen of successful people, is that ability to focus.
Yeah.
And when I get it, boy, I'll tell you, it's going to make a world of difference for me when I figure that out.
Yeah, no, really good recommendation. And I don't think we've had that answer before for that question, so that's good to hear something different. So, Well, it's been great having you on the show. I've really enjoyed having the conversation. I hope you have too. And so I'll end by again, thank you for coming on and joining us.
Always a pleasure to talk about the industry, Dr. Dan. So let me know anytime you need anything else to talk about. We'll talk more about you next time and talk more about the great work that our producers are doing. Happy to talk about any number of things, but we're trying to be sort of, a little more focused here, and hopefully folks who work with me are going to help me find that. So thanks for this.